want to start with a very open question. It'll be good to kind of get your views here. And happy for you guys to take it in which direction you see fit. What do you think is the biggest challenge or opportunity our changing climate poses for Europe's energy transition? Mark?
Go on then, Jaden. I'll jump straight in there. Always happy to go first if necessary. Coming from my perspective of somebody who designs, delivers, and then maintains these installations, there's clearly a challenge on making sure we're fit for the climate we're going to expect over the life of our assets. And so we've been quite careful to make sure that the quality of installation and the quality of design of those installations meets particularly added wind that you saw from Roberta's slide, that we've got some considerably greater winds in some years, yet undefined, but we are experiencing those winds that we need to make sure that our panels are fit and capable of taking. We're also interested in rainfall and other precipitation, so making sure that our panels are fit for things like hailstorms, which we've seen some massive hailstorms, certainly in southern Europe, and making sure that what we're installing is fit for the life of those installations. I think there's quite a lot of work to do both on design and installation to make sure we're going to, as an industry, we can respond to these changing scenarios.
Thanks for that. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Maybe. Go on, Monika.
No, I was just going to say that I think it was great to see the slides and your explanation, Roberta, in such a concise way as well. I think just many people feel really powerless when they kind of think about climate and the changes which are coming up and questioning what can we do. So I think that some real action is really important. And hence, from our perspective, looking at what technologies we should be investing in, one, to tackle this issue, and to also, whatever we're building, make resilient kind of assets that will kind of last in the future, and will help with the big elephant in the room is obviously the fossil fuels. Going to a world that we don't have to rely on those anymore.
And I guess that is an opportunity here, is I know that we're going to speak about the fact that renewables are a weather-reliant technology, and there's climate risk that's going to creep in there because of that fact. But I think while that's a sobering message, I think there's an opportunity here that because of climate change, we're seeing a phase out of oil and gas and an acceleration of investment into clean renewable energy. So there's definitely like a give and take there. Anthony?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it is the opportunity is this huge need to decarbonize our energy system and transition the way we do things. So electrification is definitely a massive mover, which is creating this whole secular trend for sort of renewables. So that's most definitely the opportunity, and we're seeing targets, set at the EU level, set in terms of getting countries to adopt plans to help sort of decarbonize. The challenge side, and I suppose it's already been touched on a bit, is making sure we build the right things in the right places, and this becomes a little bit more tricky as well as how do we. It's impossible to forecast exactly climate impact, but sort of doing the modeling and assessing around how climate change can impact on both location and type of renewable generation infrastructure is an important one, and that's and it probably touches on another point probably going to talk about, is just assessing risks, is how best to assess that. And so we do quite a lot of work ourselves with third parties to look at physical climate risk analysis under different scenarios up to 2100, but we can chat a bit more later on, Jaden. But yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bigger opportunity than challenges in my view.
Well, if we're on the topic of assessing climate risk, then let's just jump straight in. I guess one thing that I found really fascinating from the presentation is seeing that the impacts or the changes in solar radiation, in wind speeds, in temperature is not uniform across the European map. it's quite volatile in areas, it's concentrated in areas. So there's a question there on terms of, are particular markets going to be impacted differently than others? Is that going to impact the investment appetite? And that's a really good point in terms of building projects in the right place. So how do you go about making that decision? How are you assessing the impacts of climate?
Sure. Yeah. So in our case, and again, we're an equity investor, so we actually manage an investment fund that is in Article 9 or dark green under the Sustainable Finance Directive. So we have a pretty comprehensive ESG sort of criteria or checklist that we go through. But one of the steps when we're looking at assets that we're looking to sort of invest in is we do get a third party to do a climate risk assessment. So they would look at, they take the location. So it's again, very location specific, and they take, they know exactly the height you're looking at in terms of above sea level and so on. And they look at, up to 8 physical risks. So the likes of surface water, coastal inundation, forest fires, freeze thaw, all of these extreme weather type things, and assess that up to 2100. And effectively do a red, amber, green type assessment to say, based on that location, if it's for solar, for example, under a massive increase in temperature, how will the project perform, or and is that an issue technically, or say for a wind project where we a particular location may be subject to flooding. So what mitigation piece are you incorporating into that particular project? And so where we have then had there's whatever flood. Instead of looking at what was the 1 in 200 year flood, you're now looking at a 1 in 50 year flood as just a stress test, effectively where you're locating the asset. And this is a binary thing. We assess the risk sort of 1 to 5, and if you have a scoring above a certain level, or on certain questions you answer it negatively, well then we just don't progress. So it's very core and central to what we do in terms of looking to deploy sort of our investors' money.
And then looking ahead, how far are you able to kind of forecast it with your partners?
So that actually the modeling they do is up to 2100, which is again very much IPCC related. So it's probably a lot of the data that was shown there earlier on. So I know it's never going to be exact science, but that's the best data we have to sort of look at different scenarios. And it does influence things like solar projects it's nice to, it is good to have a slight cooling of solar. So having sort of really high temperature locations for solar is not ideal. So it does when we're looking at our project selection, it is a question. It's quite early on in our process as to a flood area. Historically there might have been a flood area, but it's maybe we steer a bit clear and look for sort of higher ground for a wind turbine or whatever.
Modeling up to 2100 is mind-blowing. It's the second time that I've had that, and it's still mind-blowing for me. But that's a good point though, in terms of we're not talking about a administration that's going to be in for 4 years or maybe 8 years. Climate is a long process. So bringing you in, Monika, how is climate impacting the investment horizon, for example?
It's a very good question in terms of the timing. And I mean, it all fits with generally kind of these type of projects we are investing in. And historically, I remember looking at projects over a sort of 15 to 20 year, like a horizon. Now we even have 40 year. It's becoming a standard how people are assessing solar or wind projects these days. And then yes, you have those questions. What will happen if? And these are very real questions. And Jaden, actually, I had some examples of projects, some just visuals. What a substation on a raised foundation could look like. If you can find us in the
Is it this one?
Yeah, no, yes, this is a wind turbine built on a raised foundation because of the flood. Example of a flood risk. So it's 2.3 meters above the ground. You raise, and then you start from that point because you worried that at some point there might be a flood risk. And then there was also a substation, which is this one. This project is near Avonmouth, near Bristol, in UK, and it's very close to the coast. So for this one, we also had to build it on a stilt, basically, kind of in a raised foundation. So yeah, if there's a flood, then all of that could kind of be underwater, and then you've got, which is very strange when you think about mixing electricity with water, but that's what you have to do. But yeah, so thanks for those. So yes, in terms of how we assess and how we then factor into our decision making. I mean, one of the strategies we apply is also diversification. So from a technology perspective, but also geographically, kind of looking at where we position in different projects. We then also look at things like perhaps some more nature-based solutions, and it's very important for us from Thrive. We are also a B Corp company, and yes, we look at what else can we do with those sites to not just generate electricity, but create more ways to pollinators and solutions that feed restoration, etc. that can work with the 40-year changing climate. It might be interesting also, I'm finding, where people are looking at things like agrivoltaics on solar. It's another kind of way of mitigating some of those risks and just future proofing those kind of projects in the future. And yeah, I mean, challenges these days are also with where all economics on projects are, in terms of the costs are increasing, the interest rates are going up. So you also need to make sure that if small things change in the future, will this project be able still to deliver? So building robust from a design perspective project will be really important. So the investment case is protected. That long-term horizon.
Yeah, the long term, is, I think, basically on what you're describing, it sounds it sounds like a really tall task, basically. But that's a really good segue in terms of project design. I know, Mark, you said earlier you were speaking about resiliency, you were speaking about build quality, you were speaking about installation. So I want to come back to you, and if anyone else has comments or a perspective to bring in here, please do as well. But coming back to resiliency and the design of projects, what is needed to ensure the resiliency to future climate pressures for operational and pipeline projects in the wider sector?
So this is one of the key focuses we have on the Solar Taskforce. So we have a primary requirement to deliver 70 gigawatts by 2035, but actually, if we're going to take our place as solar is a major plank of UK generation, then we have to provide a robust, reliable service for the UK electrical grid. And so my personal remit on the task force is I chair the skills group and I sit on the supply chain group. But in terms of skills, we try to sort of raise the overall professionalism within the sector, so that we are effectively qualifying and making sure we have competent people throughout the sector, to design and deliver the installations we're talking about. And we see that as both to improve what we have, but also to make people far more aware of the climate change that's coming and the sort of design parameters that they ought to be looking at. Now, that's not only been driven by our requirements and making sure that our investors are confident that the investments they make are going to repay, but there are insurances becoming more challenging, and certainly providing sort of some of the security to investors that professional indemnity insurance will provide is going to require us to be able to demonstrate competence and qualifications to the work we're doing, and this is proving it as a major push in terms of the professionalization, the increasing qualifications within the sector.
Yeah. Can I actually add something, Jadon? Because I think, it's very important, of course, for the resilience of the energy systems and the resilience to climate change, to look at the localized climate, and also to look at this for the design parameters. But also, I just wanted to put an emphasis on the fact that we need to look at the supply chain as well. because climate is global, is affecting all the globe, a different part of the globe, and you need to make your the supply chain also resilience to climate. Otherwise, of course, you don't reach your goal. So it's different location depending on your project as well.
Mm. And that's
Yes, I can add into that, Jane. I mean, the third task force has got a supply chain subgroup looking at exactly these issues, and it won't surprise you. We're well aware that whilst we've got 70 gigawatts in the UK, it pales into insignificance in some of the challenges that particularly Germany, France, and Spain are putting forward in terms of their aspirations for solar. And so there's quite a lot of opportunity to onshore and onboard this technology and to try and get some more manufacturing capability back into Europe. And this also will address some of the slavery issues which are becoming increasingly important to many of our investors, that we need to make sure that the products that we're procuring and installing are free of particularly child labour from around the world. And so these issues are increasingly important, particularly with just the sheer volume that's going to be deployed within Europe.
Yeah, thanks for that. So we've touched a couple of themes there around supply chain. We've touched on bankability and insurability, and I actually do want to come back to that. But I think there's a general conversation here about risk management, both from that policy level, but also on that individual level too. Before we jump into our next question, I just want to give everyone a reminder. I can see that we already have a couple of questions coming in. Keep them coming. We have maybe another 10 minutes or so of this discussion, and then we'll spend some time looking at your questions. So if you do have a question, get it in now, so we have time to do so. But to circle back on a couple of the themes that we've touched, there around bankability, and this is really for everyone. Are climate pressures impacting the bankability and insurability of projects? And if so, how is that affecting your decision-making space?
Yeah, so maybe a couple of comments on this one. So yeah, it's it is so clearly if climate is a risk to a particular project in a particular location, then the significant questions are asked. So similarly as well, when we're looking to do an equity investment in a project or raise project finance debt, we have a technical due diligence which would be completed around that, and an insurance due diligence as well. Now the lenders themselves would assess again, each of the risks will be identified as red, amber, green, and it's climate and location, and if there's an assessment that there is I give an example. We had a solar project we were looking at, and it was flood risk piece. So there was a view of, okay, well, let's look at the mountain structure, make it higher, make sure all the connector boxes are up above what could be like a 1 in 100 year type flood level, and then that was viewed then as being sort of bankable. So in fairness, it's I think the professionals are used to this in terms of just trying to figure out how do we mitigate a particular risk, and then once the mitigation is there, you do have the bankability piece there. And then similarly, now there is questions, probably increasing questions over on the insurance piece around maybe on the business interruption side. That can get a bit tricky if a project is prone to a climate-related business disruption. So that's becoming an area of increasing focus. I've started to see. Now, we ourselves probably veer a little bit away from taking on too much risk on projects from a climate perspective, but just talking to industry peers and so on, it's definitely, so it's yes is the answer to your question, but it's been measured, which is good in terms of figuring out sort of mitigations, both in terms of bankability and insurability of projects. Because I suppose climate is a reality, it's happening. So it's how do we adapt is a key point.
Yeah, it's been measured, and there's a need to adapt. Some really good key themes there. And then just to kind of bring Mark back into this on this conversation around risk, you mentioned earlier around professional indemnity insurance. I'm just kind of curious kind of where EPCs kind of fall within this matrix of risk, Yeah,
so the great thing about professional indemnity insurance is it provides what we call consequential loss insurance to investors. So if a for whatever reason, a particular design reason, a product or an installation fails or doesn't meet the expectation that's required, that was specified at the outset, then the consequences of that failure are generally covered by professional indemnity insurance, and it leaves investors generally whole from where they should have been. The challenge is going to come, and I think Roberta's slide demonstrated this really very well, is the slide that showed the billion-dollar insurance claims just going up and up and up and up. Insurers are getting very, very nervous about insuring things where there's an open-ended risk and liability. And so we are already seeing our professional indemnity insurance is struggling to cover climate risk. I've got a portfolio of panels in the Midlands here in the UK. The insurers turned around this year and said, we want twice as much to insure you. And by the way, we're not going to cover wind risk, which, well, that's for me, that's the primary risk of insuring of panels. Yeah. So you can see insurers are getting really very nervous about any claim that they think they can dodge or duck and dive out of, and for understandable reasons. You know, as Roberta's slide showed, they've got some massive claims going through. But I do worry that investors are going to have to get used to a different type of insurance environment. So once a product of installation has been handed over, I think we're going to have to rely on that. Insurers are going to need to rely on business interruption insurance and latent defects cover, which is a far tighter insurance arrangement, and is far, you know, the specification of what it pays out for is far tighter, but it will at least be affordable, and it will be available, which professional indemnity insurance may not be.
And then yeah, go ahead, Monika.
I was just going to say, in terms of insurance, that something that, you know, I've seen, I mean, investors are very good at managing risk and, you know, thinking what the risks are, how we, and insurance has been one of those areas that, you know, mitigants that how risks can be managed. And I guess what I struggle with is that, you know, insurance is usually a 1 year kind of policy. You know, I've never seen a project that you agree in insurance for the, you know, even 5, 10. It is an annual policy, and often if some of these risks are pushed to an insurance solution, you know, in 5, 10 years, 25, I'm just not sure, you know, and we already see projects. I've seen some very long-term projects where insurance is just not able to be kind of in place. So as investors, we have to provide for situations that perhaps, you know, might not be insurable, and, you know, consider some sort of you know, enough provisions in your models to make sure that in the worst case scenarios you have something to rely on.
It sounds like we have some investors here that are getting a bit more comfortable with risk then.
Well,
which good to hear.
I mean, but from what Mark was discussing and Anthony, in terms of, you know, the robustness of the project as well, it's you know, it's no place for cutting corners anymore, and, you know, it's something we have to really think about when we.
I think, Monika, that's entirely right. I mean, we have to. What it's generating is a far closer discussion between the investors and the delivery teams. We're seeing a far, you know, for the intelligent investors, we are seeing a far greater involvement in the quality of in the design and the quality of installation, and, you know, they're not relying on that insurance as a sort of guaranteed stop loss if something goes wrong. They need to make some of that risk and manage some of that process themselves.
Also, I just want to quickly sneak in a question here, because I feel we'll probably have a question about this, and that's around performance. So we saw from Roberta's slides, you know, the weather is going to change, and that's going to impact quite likely the performance of assets. We've talked a lot about how climate's going to impact the resiliency of assets, but what about the performance? Should the sector expect changes there? And if so, are particular markets becoming less or more attractive because of climate? What's the insights that we can share here?
Well, I think I did show some trends for solar in Europe, for example. Of course, every region is different. It shows more radiance, increase in radiance, and therefore I think it's a good news for the energy, for the solar energy industry, of course, especially in Europe. But we also have to think about, and for wind it was different, and because we also need to look not only at the trend of climate, but also the climate variability and the drivers of this climate variability. For example, in Europe, we have the North Atlantic oscillations. So there are some decadal oscillation as well. And that's important to take into consideration, especially when we look at projects and the bankability of the projects, and we need to have a long series of data that we need to look at for the bankability of the project. And the other aspect also that I want to raise is that climate change is not affecting only the production of energy, but also the demand. Demand is going to change. Maybe we are going to have more demand during summer than winter now, and that was not the case in the past because of the global warming. So we need to also take into consideration the fact that demand is going to be affected as well as the production, and we need to be smart to combine these contributions, and because more we are smart with it, and better we can provide affordable service to the public.
Awesome. And it sounds like that we could probably even have a conversation about, how climate is likely to change the economics of renewable projects in Europe. But I don't think we're going to have enough time for that. Anthony, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to say?
Yeah, just maybe one very quick comment, to conscious of time, but just on this, typically, so always when we're looking at new projects, and the oil industry you would get sort of an expert analysis done of the resource. That is typically historically based, so there is that question mark of how do you factor in some future changes. But by looking at probabilities around like a P50 or 50% or a P90, 90% probability of output, it does give those sort of boundaries to be able to assess, what if different things changes. And you do have sort of uncertainties built into some of these analysis around environmental, whether that's sort of in soiling or in solar, or it could be icing in. So there is question marks, but having from investors and bankers would look at those probability assessments to get a bit of a better feel for how would a project perform under different levels of probability and different levels of impact.
Yeah.
But it's a valid question as to how do we factor in the way things are going to change, because people don't know, and history isn't giving us the exact answers.
Yeah, and I think that's a really strong point that both yourself and Roberta were making there. It's just this idea that we have the capability to forecast, but it's not 100% clean, and actually various stakeholders are going to have to be comfortable with a level of variability and unpredictability, which is just the reality, it seems. So we have some questions here from the audience. I know I did say I wanted to make some time for them. We have one question from Mark, and his question is, how do you deal with product longevity risk? Solar panels may not perform well for 25 years, but the supplier/importer may no longer be in business by then. Any advice?
So a quick comment from our side is we typically would look at those tier 1 type solar panel producers, and so people like Bloomberg New Energy Finance produce a list, and so it's a list of, and these are the more bankable. So typically they're the bankable people. So look, who knows what's going to happen in 25 years time, but it's as good as sort of an indication of level of creditworthiness and robustness and sustainability of a panel manufacturer as any.
Mark, it looked like you had a comment.
I think it's a challenge, and particularly the innovation that we're seeing coming into our sector. We're going to see significantly different products and improvements in inverters and the like, and it is going to be a challenge to manage these historic assets and maintain them as to their full effectiveness. And we know that mixing panels even now is a challenge on sites if on some of the large solar farms, if you have a string go down and the panels need replacing, finding similar panels with similar characteristics is getting more difficult. So we're seeing a limited number of supplies being left on site for spares, but I think it's just a risk that investors are going to have to be aware of, and to make sure there's provision for it.
Yeah. Any additional comments before I move on? That's okay. So we also have a question from Joe. Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining us. His question is, how has the US Inflation Reduction Act affected infrastructure investment in the EU? And what is the EU and UK doing to catch up, especially on the tax credit incentives?
Well, should I give you an answer from the UK perspective, which is clearly this is something that the Solar Taskforce is looking at the moment, Jaden?
Yeah.
And the answer is I can't give you an answer because we've got an election coming up, and there's going to be all sorts of things batted around, I suspect, on the election side. All I can say is that the route map that we're producing is well aware that we have the IRA coming from the States, and also some very large numbers being talked around and promoted in Europe. And we have to have our own UK protection to make sure that we're doing something to protect our industries and our investments here in the UK. That is being looked at on the route map. It's not exactly in my brief, but it will be picked up at within the main task force. Within Europe, we're aware that there's quite a lot of work going on in Europe at the moment, and there are some equivalencies in some of the programs they've got promoting at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've just come back from New York, and the IRA is all of the rays. I think that's a good point around tax credit incentives. It's not only just for solar, it's now applicable for standalone storage too. So standalone storage is now even more attractive in the US than it once was. Same for green hydrogen. They've set up the hydrogen hubs as well. And I think a crucial point that was mentioned a bit earlier in the webinar was around domestic manufacturing, and there's domestic manufacturing tax credits for that too. So it does seem as if competition has increased, and that is actually one thing that is going to be discussed at Solar Planets and Investment Europe, is that Europe is not accelerating their energy transition in a vacuum, but actually Europe is competing against a whole range of other markets globally. And what does that mean for capital allocation from institutional investors? What does that mean for those downstream in terms of capturing as much return to kind of make sure flows of capital are healthy? Q1 of this year was one of the worst years for fundraising for infrastructure investment. So a couple of sobering messages, but it is a conversation that is taking place. So thanks for that question, Joe. Another question from Mark. Isn't one of the biggest risks for solar PV projects isn't one of the biggest risks for solar PV projects the delays in permitting and in-grid connection?
Well, I'm happy to jump in again.
Yeah.
See, Anthony's desperate to get in. Anthony, why don't you kick off as the investor perspective?
Sure. Yeah, no, it is. Like, it's a challenge right across the industry, right across Europe, I would say, and in the solar. Now, actually, solar is probably a little bit more fortunate than wind. Wind can be even more challenging in certain geographies. Pick France, for example, it could be like 6 years for a wind project, whereas you might get, a solar project in 2 type thing. So definitely solar is the better. It's I suppose visual impact is clearly the one that people will pick on. I think there's been, in fairness, there's been quite a bit of initiatives on this, and the EU has some directives to sort of try and have particular zones identified by member states where they'll promote sort of development of renewable energy assets, and that's been pretty good. It's like in Spain, there's under projects under a certain size, you don't have to complete a fully environmental impact assessment, which just help speed up things. It's the critical question is just getting our pipeline of projects up, because there is the capital is there, or having more supply is hugely important. The grid is the big challenge. That is a massive challenge, and particularly in a lot of geographies, and the best use of grid. It is a hard one to do, but again, there's a lot of the member states have their own particular plans, and it's around interconnection as well, because that's probably, personally, I think, is the best way to try and help when we get higher levels of renewable penetration, is to not have constrained curtailment, take on not have green power that we can't use in time. So look, it's a constant battle. Really is a big issue for the industry. But I think actually related back to the IRA comment about the US, like there is the Green Deal industrial plan in Europe, which is helping to pinpoint things like transmission infrastructure. So that hopefully, like I think the IRA in the US is fantastic because it really does help reindustrialize. So we do need to see that in Europe as well, both in terms of getting solar plant manufacturing more onshore, but also just increasing investment in enabling infrastructure such as transmission.
Awesome. And then Stuart has also left a comment about recent announcements from Ofgem in a UK context around kind of clearing out connection queues.
Absolutely.
And public projects, which is a really good point to kind of bring in there. We are talking about climate risk here today, but we do talk about grid, permitting, EPC shortfalls, you name it, at Solar Finance and Investment. So if you do have questions around there, definitely feel free to check that out. We have 2 more questions, so if we could have some really quick answers here. We got a question here, not to mention that products change, e.g. it is almost impossible to find full cell PV modules anymore. Is that an experience that everyone shares?
I think I probably answered this previously, Jaden. It is technology is moving on, and it is getting increasingly difficult to find historic products as technology moves on, and that's there are some fantastic products coming down the line, and so there will be more change and probably more impactful change as well over the next 10-15 years.
Yeah. And then last question, and what about the influence and impact of climate changes on all the other hardware such as cables, structures? Is this something that's factoring in your decision-making spaces? Interesting.
I mean, the structures may be, and we've already seen examples where people are raising things out of flood risk, but we're not seeing a lot of change in terms of cabling or inverters just yet.
Okay. Awesome. That is good. So I have just one last question, and it'll be good if you guys just give me maybe an answer in one sentence just to kind of round this up. I think it's really interesting what's going to be happening in 2024. If you're not already aware, it's forecasted to be the biggest election year all across the world in recorded history. And by that, I mean, so many countries are having elections at the same time that roughly half of the global population, so 4 billion people, will have the opportunity to vote at the polls next year. We also have COP next week, so it just seems to me as if there's scope for political ripples to take root next year. So it'll be good to kind of get your view. What would you hope to see from policymakers for 2024 and beyond? One sentence, please.
I will say something that I think it's so important for everyone, investor community, politicians, everyone, is how we bring people on the journey and really, give people a stake in this in this energy transition, sort of facilitating that. I think it's important we listen to people and make them be part of this transition.
Awesome. Roberta?
Yeah, I was thinking very important to have a long-term view, not just the next elections, but not 4 years, but really looking forward in our horizon, because we need to have that kind of view to build a totally new system that is helping stopping climate change, but also making us more resilient to climate change and be more sustainable. I think what I want from policymaker is a long-term strategy, not a short one.
Long-term strategy. Mark?
Well, I think two very brief answers. One is I think we need more leadership. You see Roberta's slides, and the world is crying out for some leadership on driving the net zero agenda hard and fast. The other is that the Taskforce will be publishing its requirements of government here in the UK in spring next year. So watch this space.
Awesome, thanks for that. Looking forward to it. And then Anthony?
Yeah, everything. Agree with everything that's been said. I think probably I'd like to see. Let's take an EU solar perspective. Doing a sort of an IRA equivalent in Europe is going to be hard because of all the different member states. So I'd love to see more supply chain in national governments take sort of push on bringing supply chain and boosting that, whether that's production or batteries or getting the whole green industrial base growing.
Perfect. In response to the IRA, I agree. Okay, so thanks everyone. This is all that we have time for today. We could honestly have gone on for hours. We haven't even touched on other topics like the economics of projects, etc. And even supply chains. We only just grazed. But I would like to thank all of our wonderful panelists for today, for their expertise and their perspectives. I found that conversation incredibly insightful. I enjoyed moderating, and I'm sure that our audience enjoyed the conversation too. And then for all of you that are tuning in remotely, I would just like to encourage you to have a look at our Solar Finance and Investment Europe Summit. That's taking place on the 31st of Jan, 1st of Feb 2004 in central London. As I said, all of these wonderful people are going to be there. So if you do want to network and see them in person, definitely show up and represent. And then just for a bit of context, that is it is our flagship finance event looking at European solar and storage. It is the meeting place for decision makers from European developers, funds, banks, and many, many more. As an attendee of this webinar, you have access to exclusive discount-free entry. Just use webinar 15, and that's also being dropped in chat. It's also on the screen now for an additional 50% when booking tickets for you and your team. And then lastly, we have more free to attend webinars. It's really fun to actually put these on in the pipeline. The next one is looking at the perspectives of institutional investors with representation quite literally from all corners of the world. So really excited for that. I can't say too much more on that, but if you are interested, just follow us on social media. I've also put a link to our LinkedIn page just to follow us in terms of announcements on this and other items. But yeah, thanks everyone again for your time. Thanks to our panelists, and have a lovely rest of your day. Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.